Hi everyone. Nice to meet you all. There's some familiar faces from previous talks and previous meetups, and I'm glad like this is growing because I actually know I got a bunch of people that are in London and use Blender, and they're not here, but it's probably because they haven't heard of it. So we'll try to get them to join sooner or later. My talk is going to be about animation. A little bit, I'm going to talk about myself, put you in context. But I'm thinking that it's a good idea to also shift it a little bit and talk a little bit about career advice, because I can see a bunch of people are looking into working their skills up to actually get a job in industry, whether it's animation per se or whatever related to create 3D art in Blender. And I consider myself fairly capable at this, also because I've been mentoring people for a long time and helping people grow in their careers as well. So I'm Luciano. I'm from Chile. I've been living and working in London for approximately 3 years now. I've worked for 13 years in animation. Started doing commercials and what's it called, motion graphics and stuff like that, and then kind of evolved to do what I wanted to do, which was film. And I've been working here in London in feature films for the last 3 years, on and off, because I went to Australia in between and to Belgium in between. I'm actually right now working in a project in the Netherlands by being in London because, lockdown and everything. So it kind of allows it to happen. I was supposed to move to the Netherlands, but yeah, it was kind of a complex deal. Let me see if I can have you all here, because I kind of like looking at all of your faces, see if there's any reactions. That I found that the worst part about doing Zoom presentations is like you can make a joke and you can never hear anybody laughing. Mostly when they all have the cameras off, it's like, so what's the reaction here, right? And that's why I touched the subject of the films also, because making a film is about making people feel something, whether it's happiness, sadness, making them feel, I don't know, tenderness or anything. And it's kind of like doing a presentation. You're just on the one side, you're presenting something, you're presenting an idea, but underneath, what you want is to leave them with a message, with a feeling, with something interesting, right? And so, yeah, I worked as an animator and as a generalist. I studied audiovisual communications back in 2003. I finished in around 2006. And that's when I went in to start studying animation, because I figured out I wanted to do visual effects at that point. So I wanted to do movies and explosions and stuff like that. And along the way, I found character animation, which is something I never thought about. And I was lucky enough to have good teachers that kind of guided me a little bit, and then friends and people, and started knowing people in the industry. And I fell in love with the job, basically. And so I worked in a bunch of different things. And because Chile is such a small country, I had to learn a little bit of everything. I learned a little bit of modeling, and a little bit of lighting, and a little bit of rigging. And then I understood that rigging and animation was very connected. And as I was telling Michael before we started the call, I had to learn rigging because rigging was like the bureaucrats, right? You have your model and you want to animate it, and you just need to go and ask somebody permission so you can animate your characters. And it's like, I can do the job and I want to get paid, but I need to go and set myself as a self-employed and do all of this bureaucracy so I can actually connect one with the other. And that's rigging to me in a nutshell, right? But it's a very important part, because if you don't do that well, you can't actually animate, right? So there has to be a balance between the animation and the rigging as well, if you're working on projects on your own. And so in 2012, I started my own animation studio with a couple of friends, which ended up being just pretty much a one-man studio. And I kept that for like 4 or 5 years until I said, okay, finally it's time to move on. But that taught me a lot of things that nothing else taught me, that, which was being self-sufficient as an artist, like being able to self-learn, being able to handle a team, because at some point I hired a bunch of people, so I was able to accomplish some of the projects, and also gave me tools for learning how to negotiate, which is one of the things that I think is really lacking, I see a lot of my coworkers, I worked at Framestore, DNEG, Jellyfish Pictures here in London, and most of my coworkers that came from like studying directly into the workforce never had a chance to work freelance or something like that. So they really don't know how to negotiate. So you can see that in a reflection of their salaries as well. And it's important part of progressing in your career, being able to know how much you're worth, being able to know that there's more people around you and you're at a certain level. And so you can grow that way as well, which is one of the reasons why I changed studios so much. I normally stay in a studio for a project and then I leave, because if you stay too long, you kind of stall. So anyways, let's go back. And so after a couple of years of having my own studio, I decided I wanted to do film. In the meantime, I worked in a game studio, in a very indie game studio back in Chile, which we did what's it called, an AR game when AR was not around. We're talking about Project Tango. Google developed this technology back in 2015 or 2016, something like that, which was basically something that they wanted to implement in phones and everything like that. And so we were doing like a demo for their technology, which ended up in a very cool game that nobody can play because the technology was only implemented in one phone from LG, which nobody bought, obviously, because it was over expensive. And so, yeah, we lost the game. The game is like somewhere there in a drawer. I cannot even play it. In any case, as this progressed, I took a class in Barcelona because I knew I wanted to go into film and I needed to progress my skills, and I was falling a little bit behind because with all of what I learned during my experience as a studio owner, in one sense, I did fail to progress much more as an animator as I should have. And so I took this like as a little bit of a shortcut, which was taking a class, like log intensive class of like a year, where I dedicated myself like completely to doing animation, which was great. And so for some reason, this thing was supposed to process yesterday and still not processed. That's my reel, but in any case. So other than being an animator, I run a small YouTube channel, which I'm not going to promote much, but I'm going to say that in this YouTube channel, I talk specifically about animation and workflows for animation in Blender. And I have a big background on Maya and Blender. I started in Blender in 2009. I was lucky enough to fall into like a little class with Bassam Kurdali. You might have heard of him. He was the director of Elephant Stream, the first open movie. And lucky for me, because this was a guy that really knew Blender down to its core and the design ideas behind it. So it helped me understand why most of the things that I was doing in Blender, like Maya, they were not supposed to work like that. And there was a logic to it. And learning the logic of a software, I think, is like very powerful, because once you learn the logic that it's designed by, then it's much easier to navigate and to learn how to do other things. Like the bigger problem I see with people transferring from Maya to Blender is that they expect things to work the same way. And you can do the same things, they're just not the same way because they're thought of in a different way. I have to say also some things seems to have not been thought through, but that's another particular thing, right? So I have this little channel where I explain stuff every week, and today I released a video about using the post library, which is something really useful in production. In fact, the reason I did this video was because I started this project last week, as I said, in a studio in the Netherlands called Submarine, and it's a studio that's been around for like 15 years. But one of the things is that they do everything in Blender, and they do VFX, and they do feature films, and this is their first feature film, like entire animated feature, and everything in Blender from top to bottom, right? And so why I did this video is because when I started, our team is going to be like 10 animators in total, and I would say out of the 10, 2 of us have experience with Blender, animating in Blender, and the rest of them come from a Maya background, like most people do, mostly when you specialize in character animation, because that's what taught at schools, even online or offline or whatever. Because Maya, whether we like it or not, it's the industry standard. And so most of the artists that you're going to find are, at least the professional ones, are usually using Maya. And so I've been creating like small I've done a little bit of talks with them to show them what works, so how it works, so whatever they are used to, how they can transfer their knowledge. And so I created this little video about creating poses and storing them in a library and being able to call them up and using an add-on that's been around for ages to help this process as well. So stuff like that you're going to see in my channel. And so, as I said, today I wanted to talk a little bit about animation. And last time I was here, I tried to do a walk cycle, and the problem with the walk cycle is like a huge endeavor for like a half an hour class. Imagine I've been only talking for 13 minutes, so I have 17 minutes to go, and I should have a finished product by the end of the class, which is not going to happen because you never do good animation in 20 minutes. But I'm going to try at least on hit 2 poses and see what we can do in between to make this interesting. And what I'm going to use, I'm going to use a rig that I have available in my store, but any rig works because I'm going to use a rig done in Rigify. So a quick note about Rigify, if for those of you who are interested in creating character animation or characters in general and posing them, Rigify is a tool that comes with Blender and basically allows you to create a rig in 5 minutes, like literally 5 minutes. And you obviously, if you invest 20 minutes, you can make it much better, right? If you may invest a day on it, it's much better. But like literally 5 minutes. If I go into Blender, I turn on the add-on, obviously, which might be turned on, but just to let you know, right? Rigify, you see it's on because I use it all the time. And then you just go to add, you get this little set of options, which are pre-made meta rigs. A meta rig in Rigify is basically a base, which you adjust, and then you get a rig. And so if I use this, you see this one comes with a body, has boobs even, 5 fingers, and a face, right? And if I just generate this, because this is just the base that I adjust to adjust my proportions. If my character has 4 arms, I can just duplicate the arms and put it in a way to accommodate or stuff like this. And if I generate this, what we'll do is we'll take all of these positions and create the correct corresponding controllers to work with this in animation properly, right? And so you see we have all of the controllers with the colors and stuff like that. But that's not the important part. That's not what we're going to see here. As I was saying, it's good to know because I see a lot of you are trying to get into the animation part, and this is a good way to like skip off the bureaucrats, right? So we just like, you create a rig with Rigify and then you're ready to go. You just go on animating. Obviously, there's always things that you might want to fix. In my YouTube channel, there is a video, like it's like 2 hours or 3 hours in total between all the videos, where I go step by step on how you can do this. And so I'm going to load in a character that I rigged with Rigify, and I'm a big believer in this system just because most of us really don't need to learn how to rig. If you're going to be an animator and work professionally in a studio, somebody else is going to rig. But if you're going to work at home in your own projects, you need to be able to be self-sufficient, which doesn't mean that you need to become a professional rigger. And so this does most of the job for you. And so I'm going to linking this character just because it's the proper way to do it. And I'm going to go to my Dropbox. It's somewhere here, right? So Dropbox, you see I had Maya there as well. I don't know, blasphemy, right? And so I'm going to go Gumroad, and I'm going to bring in Spider-Gwen. Actually, I had done a little bit of a demo, but that's okay. File releases. So I'm going to go pick up this. And this is one thing that you might not know, depending on how old you are in Blender. Blender's files are kind of like a library. So when you link or you import an asset, you don't need, you won't import the entire file like you do in Maya or Max or any other software. You basically get into the file and pick the data that you need. And so I'm going to go and pick up a collection, which I intelligently named linked this, because it's really hard to distinguish which one it is. And if you save a file and 3 years later you want to link it in, you never know what it's what. And maybe you change your naming conventions. So I just put link this, and that's enough, right? And so we get a character that wasn't modeled by me. That's a freely available character from Sketchfab. I just adjusted the proportions so it was a little bit more pleasing, and like played with the shaders a little bit and stuff like that. So if you look at it rendered, it should look a little bit more pretty. You're gonna start hearing my graphics card going. All right, so we got, yeah, and so you see it has like a shader with the dots and the lines and all the beautiful stuff that we love from Spider-Verse. And now I'm going to link the rig. So for that, with the character selected, I'm just going to go Object, Relations, and make Proxy. And basically, Proxy is kind of like a copy of the rig that it's done locally so you can animate it. And so I'm just going to click that one because it's the one thing I want to do. And now I'm ready to animate. It's that simple, right? So I'll save this file as a landing. And so this one should go somewhere here, landing 1. Right. And so in Blender, particularly, because this is something that no other software does, you have several modes. And in animation, you want to select your armature and go into pose mode for animation, object mode to shift stuff around, but you rarely want to do that with your armature. You normally want to keep it in the center and then move the inside objects. That's why you have this big circle here, right? This one is basically to position your character, and every character you'll see ever in the world has this, right? It's the main controller that you will pose, which is different from going to object mode and moving this. As you can see, it produces different results. But also it can be parented. In any case, you don't want to do that. You just want to go into pose mode and move the big one. And so I thought I'm going to try a simple thing just to show you more or less the workflow and how I handle things. So I'm going to create a camera. I'm going to go to object mode and create a camera, because unless you're doing VR or AR or games, and in reality, most of the time, you want to focus on a camera. Even when you are doing stuff for games and VR and like interactive, to call it one thing, you still want to try to think, well, what's the point of view of the spectator? Obviously, for instance, in a game, you can turn around, right? But most of the time, you're going to look at the characters from one angle. And so that's the most important one. And that's where you should be animating too. Even if you need to make sure that everything is kind of proper in space, you still need to think about what's the most important angle where the character is going to be more appealing, where the things are going to read more. So I'm just going to put this camera here. I'm going to slide this to the side so we can have one camera view, right? And one working view, which I like to use mostly when the characters are light and the scene is light. It's much better, much easier to do that than changing and coming back. Obviously, and a lot of projects where sometimes the rigs are super heavy and stuff like that, you can gain a little bit of frames per second in your viewport by just using one viewport and like closing up the other one and just switching back and forth with the tilde, right? We have this, so we can jump back and forth much easier. If anybody's interested, I'm just going to turn on the hotkeys so you can see me press stuff. If anything, if you need to interrupt me and ask me a question, please do. That's going to make it much more interesting for everybody. So let's go back here, right? I'm going to choose a camera angle that's a little bit more, a lens that's a little bit shorter, 35 or something like that, because we're going to be doing like imagine a landing, a hero landing, right? So the hero lands in the camera. a little bit tilted, like a little bit Dutch tangle and stuff like that.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry, may I interrupt you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I have a quick question. I'm kind of new to animating in Blender. I just started animating characters a year ago. Oh, sorry, almost 2 years ago. Anyway, the way I use it is making proxies on rigging, but rather library overrides. Could you explain these differences? Maybe.
So library overrides is a new system, basically. That's okay. I got the question. So library overrides is a new system, and they're working on it as they go during the new project that they're doing at the Blender Foundation. And so the main difference is that with library overrides, you basically open up that collection that you linked originally, and now you get access to everything that's inside. And that's super powerful because you can change the scale of something, you can change the color of something, you can modify it a little bit here and there. And that's powerful for stuff like, mostly at this point, for like lighting and stuff like that, when you need to tweak things. In the case of animation, it doesn't make a huge difference. But the reason I'm not using it currently much is because, as far as I hear, it's a little bit more, what's it called, crashy than the old version, right? And also, to do that, you need to set up a few things on the rigs. So for instance, the rigs have a couple of properties that you usually, like for instance, torso parent. Like this one basically changes who the parent of the torso is. And to use that with the current system, you don't have to do anything. But if you do it with the library overrides, you need to go into the original rig files and tell that property that is library overridable. And so you need to do that. And so you need to update your rigs for them to work with it. And so I see that it's going super well. It's even faster. Like I've seen that they can run even like 24, they tried like 24 characters, instances of the one character in one scene playing real time. But the drawback is the problem that it may crash. And I don't know, like I haven't tested it fully. I just know how to work with it. But at the end of the day, animation wise, it doesn't make a big difference yet, right? So, and also, which I found is that if you create a library override and you want to revert it, or you started like this and then you want to turn it into library override, it's basically 2 clicks and then you just transfer your action. So at any point, you can jump between the 2 of them and keep your animation, no problems, right?
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. And so I'll just hide the camera from the viewport so it doesn't bother me so much. And as you can see here, there's this property that I mentioned, and there should be more, but because sometimes, I have no idea why, sometimes it doesn't load the rig UI, because Blender's UIs created for the rigs and everything, it's a Python script. So I'm just going to go and try to load that. And it comes here in the script editor, and just press play on it. And now you can see we get this interface, which is the extra controllers of the rig to do more advanced stuff like space switching and stuff like that. And so I think because of the time, we might even end up with just the one pose. So let's try to do a cool pose. And so one of the things I like about Blender, for instance, is that you can, for instance, select 2 controllers and a third one, and then make that third object the pivot. And so now I can move them all together. And let's make sure that she has a leg like open there. And so here what I'm looking for is the dynamics of the pose, and trying to convey, like she's like a spider girl, right? The spider Gwen. You should have all seen Spider-Verse by now. If you haven't, please, when we finish this, go watch it. It's amazing. It's a great film overall, and like good story, good art, good everything. Like, yeah, I was impressed, and I watched it again a couple of days ago, and I'm still like, oh. So I'm just going to try to imagine a pose that's similar to what we would have seen from them. They're usually really low, right? It's kind of kneeling. As you can see, we have like these stretchy arms, which are great for doing cartoony stuff, but it's also important to bear in mind that you want to use those in like very small fractions of time, because it's very easy to go off model and forget that the character still is supposed to have some proportions, right? So I usually start by turning those off, so I make sure that I don't go off for too much, and then if I need it, I can turn it on. Right, so I'm gonna push that out, and then I'm gonna make sure that it's like a little bit like that, right? And so here I'm trying to look for flow in the pose, for readability. And as you can see here, this is kind of flattish. So I want to make maybe one line that goes, let's see if I turn it on. Yeah, maybe one line. Just gonna turn off the bones and motion paths and origins and everything else besides my annotations. So maybe one line that goes across the shoulder and back down to the floor, something like that, which will make it flow a little bit better. And so I'm going to twist the torso so it's a little bit more natural. I can, for instance, one hotkey that I really love and I hit at the same time, it's Control-Shift-M, because it flips from one controller to another one. So if I select this one and I know I want the other leg, sometimes it's much easier to press that one and flip to the other one. That makes it, if that makes any sense for anybody. And I usually switch it to something more handy, more close to my fingers, which is really important in animation, because 99% of our time, what we're doing is posing, putting keyframes, posing and putting keyframes, right? So you want to make sure that actually selecting, posing, and putting keyframes. And so you want to make sure that that workflow, which is like those three actions, are as fast as possible, because you need to accomplish a lot to do just 24 frames, right? And so we'll do something like so. Right, we want, and as you can see, the head for some reason stays looking forward. That's because the head has this little attribute, which is head follow. Basically, it tells it to either follow the chest or follow the world, and so you can either choose either both. The reason that head follow is off by default is because most of the time the head is kind of more aligned to the ground than anything else, like kind of like a chicken, right? So even if you're standing like this, you never keep your head like that. You're most likely to tilt back up, right? Also, if like you're walking or something like that, then your head will stay stiller than the rest of your body. You still will move it and everything and will react, but you're more likely to try to keep it more still. So I'm just going to push this a little bit up, try to keep that. And so now I'm, for instance, going to turn on my tweaks and curve a tiny bit the arms, just a tiny bit, so we can make that flow that I was talking about. So it all feels a little bit more connected in like that one line, right? Also, probably I can do sometimes like the opposite curve just to make it like stronger or like to make it feel that there's more tension. And so I'll turn this on. And for instance, this is another hotkey I love, which is Alt-Z, which will make the controllers appear through the geometry no matter what. So you can, like, I usually use it to turn them on and see what's behind. That way you don't need to make sure that every control goes around the body. Sometimes they can just stay inside and you can just like switch between one and the other one. And then with Alt-Shift-Z, you turn on and off all the overlays, which allows you to see the pose much better, right? So you don't have to be changing between everything. But this is something like you'll do a lot of the time, right? So I'm going to push this a little bit further, and then I'm going to try to grab a little bit of that. Yeah, something more like that. Maybe the knee should go up a little bit more. The other one, right? Damn, something like that. And right, and maybe we can use her eyes to just like do it like that. And yeah, we sort of got a pose, and I think Maybe if I push this one a little bit further out, this one might have been too much, right? We can also play maybe with the balance, but I think she feels balanced in general. Besides this elbow that's a little bit too far out. So yeah, the idea is to also get, because we're working like a fan art to say, we also need to try to live up to the material. And so this is a good thing to do as a practice, because when you already have previous good material to rely on, then it's good for improving and learning on your own, because that way you already have a solid base to work in. One of the bigger problems that I've seen in a lot of the times with people that are starting is that sometimes you want to do it all. And so, for instance, I have this friend, Alex Trevino. You might have seen his work. He's like very big in the Blender community. And most of his work is based on somebody else's concept. He goes and talks to them and say, hey, I would like to do my interpretation of your work in 3D. And I'd love to do that, because he knows he's not a character designer, right? He doesn't do concept art, but with a good concept art, he can do great work. And again, if you're gonna go work in the industry, whether it's for a bigger studio or a smaller studio, usually this is departmentalized, right? If you're a modeler, or a lighter, you normally won't light out of the blue. You won't just come out with however the lights go. You're gonna get like a concept art that kind of directs how everything should look like, right? If you're gonna work on a model, if you're gonna create like a character, normally somebody would have designed it already, so you actually get it. So actually you get it right, because that way, if you design it previously, you can make a lot of decisions before you get into modeling. So it's great exercise to, for instance, find a 2D concept and then interpret it if you're doing like a character in 3D. And so you already have all that part figured out, and you need to work on your skills of transferring that. Then as you progress with that, you focus on other skills. And animation is the same. What we usually do is we use video reference. A lot of ways to study, I did this a lot, was like to look at one clip of animation that I liked and just study how that was done and look at it frame by frame, and maybe interpreting that in another character that not necessarily had the same proportions or anything, but just that was enough to convey the same idea and the same feeling. And for instance, if it was cartoony and had like multiple arms, try to kind of copy how they did it so I could interpret it and then learn and do it in later projects. And so we can call this more or less like pose 1. And I think we run out of time, right? And I'll just key whole character. Yeah, are we good, or can I continue?
I think Luciano, perhaps another 5 minutes, but and we have one question for you when you're finished.
Go for it. All right.
From Christian's. But is that okay?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I mean, really, we need to have a special session and have you here for 3 hours, but unfortunately, we can't do that today.
Yeah, I'm just going to show you more or less what I was aiming to go for.
Yeah.
So because I did some of it like yesterday just to practice. So basically, this is the same idea based on 2 poses. And so I did a similar pose yesterday. I studied it a little bit more, looked for reference, and went like, okay, this is more or less my pose. Then worked a first pose, and then adjusted the camera towards that to fulfill the motion, and also to give the feeling of like the landing, right? You want to feel weight, you want to feel power, you want to feel the character is connected. It's not great, but it has the basics to make it work, right? You can see also the arm kind of like having that physicality of the body lands and then everything comes with, and it's connected but not like straight. It's not a piece of metal, right, that's coming out of her body. And so all of those things are the little sauce that you start adding after you have those 2 poses. Like you have really pose 1 and pose 2, and the rest of it is just special sauce, which is making sure that nothing comes all together. You see, like even a lot of it is done by the bounce of the camera, right? And then the secondary thing is like the head and then the rest of the stuff around. So yeah, so that's it. Yeah, it's super hard to do animation in 20 minutes, but at least with this, I think you get an idea of more or less how that works. So yeah, let's go to the question.
Okay, thanks. That's fantastic, Looch, really.
Thank you.
We could last long, but anyway. We've got a couple of questions here. One from Christians, who's saying, I'll read it out. What about using motion capture in animation process and budget suits? Question mark. How would you animate the hoodie fabric after the impact?
Okay, so there's several questions. So motion capture is a technique, just like 3D animation is a technique, how 2D animation is a technique, how stop motion is a technique, how film is a technique. It's just another technique, and I'm a big believer in technology, and that we need to use technology to our advantage. So basically, whatever floats your boat. If I know that a lot of studios use motion capture, for instance, for creating animation for games, sometimes for previews, sometimes for final animation. Like if you look at the Hulk in like all of the Marvel Avenger movies, that's a big combination between motion capture and hand key. Some shots are impossible to do with motion capture. Some shots are much easier done with motion capture than with the hand keyed animation. And so it will depend on your needs. I don't think it's frowned upon or anything. Like I know there's some people that say, no, everything has to be keyed, but depends on the needs of your production. Sometimes motion capture can help you achieve higher quality in less time if you know how to handle it, and if you still need to know animations. It doesn't mean that you don't need to, but in some types of projects it might be better. Mostly if you're looking for a representation of reality, because animation is one thing and motion capture is another, right? And motion capture will give you something that's closer to reality, but animation by hand, you can play it more. And so if you look at stuff like, if you guys saw The Witness, the short film from Netflix from the Love, Death and Robots, it looks motion capture and it's all hand keyed. And the reason that it looks motion capture is because they had the time and the eye and the like trained artists to make it look that realistic. And it looks obviously better than motion capture, but it feels like it has the same depth and dirtiness of motion capture, even if it was hand keyed. So both can work, and you can make your workflow whatever you want. In fact, I'm looking into this. There's this app that one guy created that you can connect the Oculus and use it more or less as a motion capture, where you can use the pivot of the head and you connect it to an IK rig and use the hands. And say you're doing a short film where the animation is fairly realistic, or you can use it as, or you want to use it as your previous stage. With that, you can achieve half of your animation and then get an idea of where you're going. And then after that, you clean it up, or you start over, or you do whatever you want with it. But I think it's a good idea because whatever makes you get to your end game faster, it's help. And sorry, what was the other question? There was a motion capture and the hoodie.
The hoodie, yeah.
So what I did is basically, and as everything with animation, you go from general to particular. You go from the most important to the less important, or you go from the bigger movement, in this case, to the lesser movement. And so because the more important thing here is the body itself, because that's what drives the entire animation. Then once I got the body working and the head working, then I animated the hoodie by hand. There's not that much animation, but you can see, right? If you look at it here, right? The hoodie has some animation there. It's not great, as I said, like the head is not great, but in this camera angle, it looks actually much better because you don't have here, because it's like in the right screen, because everything is stuck and it's not moving with the camera. There's a lot of the cheating that I did to the camera that kind of goes away, and you can see how crappy it is, right? But basically what I did is I imagine, okay, so if the head moves, then the hoodie will flap a little bit later, and I just offset it and made basically the same idea of movement that with the head. I just like make it go 1 or 2 frames later, and then the same with each one of them, so they don't feel like they're exactly the same. and that way, like if then I offsetted one frame from each other, and then that makes that feeling of just not going at the same time completely. That's it. Like animating a hoodie, a tail, like ears flapping is basically you drive the main mass, and then you make basically the same kind of movement with that smaller mass in 1 or 2 frames later than the big one moves. It's one of the principles of animation called overlapping, and it's really important to study from the basics, because a lot of what you do, for instance, here, I moved the body and then I used overlapping on the torso, and then from the torso I did overlapping on the head, and then from the head I did overlapping on the hoodie and the hand as well. So I hope that answers the question.